Well, I don't know if there's a happy call. We can shoot for happy calls. Jared in Georgia, how you doing?
I'm doing good. How are you, Matt?
I'm all right.
I just want to say, first of all, I've been watching the show for a few years, and you actually basically helped open my eyes, and I became an atheist a few years ago. And
Hooray!
I want to say thank you.
Good for you.
Thank you. I'd always been kind of logical, thinking, and I'd always had doubts, finding the flaws between logic and religion. And then after listening to you, I realized I wasn't alone, and definitely helped me open my eyes. I just want to say thank you.
You're very welcome. Although you did all the work, I just talk. You have to be willing to listen and think. So.
Yes, well, absolutely. The main reason why I called is I've been studying philosophy for the last few months, especially morality aspects. Mm-hmm. And I hear you talk about, I've seen some of the debates you do about morality and secular morality and everything else. And my question is, what kind of philosophical, standpoint do you take in evaluating if something is moral or not? Do you take like a universal approach, the on-school arguments, or do you do like consequentialism, or how do you determine where you get your morality from?
I fall into like some category of consequentialism, but not in a simple sense. So for me, and I give you the super quick breakdown, is that when I talk about morality, I'm talking about well-being in much the same way that Sam Harris talked about it in The Moral Landscape. It doesn't make sense to me to try to talk about it under any other terms, and so we live in a universe where there are certain rules that dictate the consequences of our actions, and there are also these rules that determine what is good for us and what isn't. And so there's this process of discovery, I think, where we go about finding out what's in our best interest and what isn't, and that these are truths that we're discovering. Now, I'm not advocating for moral relativism, which is the idea that a moral evaluation is merely based on what a particular society says. Oh, we say this is moral, so it's moral. I reject that. But I am talking about situational morality, that each situation needs to be judged on its own merits. And so when you talk about absolutes or objective moral truths, I'm still talking about within the context of a situation. If I'm in a situation, there's a finite set of actions I can take, and some of them are better than others and some of them worse, which means there must be some set of one or more actions that represent the moral best for that. And that's something that I learned from Dennis Loubet, I don't know how many years ago now, on nonprofits. But to say that applies universally in every situation or every similar situation is not something that I can support.
Well, the reason why I asked that is because you've used the comparison a few times about, we can say that drinking battery acid will kill human beings, and we want the human beings to be well off, so therefore we can say almost universally that drinking battery acid is bad.
Yeah, almost universally. That's the key thing. Almost. That's the key thing about moral evaluations, is that we're looking at them for specific situations, and then we're comparing those situations to how likely those similar situations are going to occur in order to come up with a generalized thing. There may be somebody who comes along at some point where drinking battery acid doesn't harm them at all. And there may be a situation that, so quite often people will say, well, are there any, is there a universal truth in any of this? And that kind of flies in the face of this situational evaluation. But there are situations that are seemingly universal. For example, I would say that I can't think of a single situation that is likely, probably, or maybe even possibly going to occur where it would put me in a position where I would agree that it is morally correct to own another being as property. Now, I can't say absolutely, but that doesn't matter because we don't have absolute certainty about anything.
Absolutely.
But when people try to come up with proposed scenarios where that might be moral, every time they've come up with some kind of cheat where they're, it's like, well, what about voluntary slavery? Well, that's like married bachelor as far as I'm concerned. There's no such thing as voluntary slavery. well, what about this particular situation? You know, somebody's got a gun to your head and says, you have to own this other person as property or I'm going to shoot you both dead. Well, what actually happens there is not slavery. It's two people who don't want to die agreeing to pretend to go along with this proposition. So I can't say that it's impossible that there's a situation where it might be moral. It just, I can't think of any. Nobody's been able to offer me any. And there comes a point where it's unreasonable to start thinking, well, you know, if there was on this Thursday a pink unicorn happened to arrive with the magical powers of curing world hunger, if you would actually enslave these 5 people over here for the rest of their lives, now we're out of reality.
Yeah. Well, the other question I was going to ask is, because you used the example also as well, that the right for you to swing your arm, you know, with a fist attached to it, ends at the end of another man's nose. And that's one of the reasons why I was calling to ask, like, for example, would you not say that is basically almost absolute, that you should never, you know, use your, basically force your will upon another person to get what you want, or use force or the threat of force to take something away from someone or to get what you want? Would that not be considered a quote close to universal as you could get as well? Or
I mean, yeah, generally speaking, we've said that before, that your right to swing your fist ends at somebody else's face type thing. You know, that's kind of a pronouncement on, you know, bodily rights, you know, allowing people freedoms and dealing with what happens when those freedoms overlap.
Yeah, well, the reason why I'm asking all this is, have you ever decided to do a debate on morality outside of religious context? What I mean by that is, you know, as a philosopher, I always like to, whatever I believe, I like to apply it to every type of scenario to try to find truth. My question is, have you not ever, I know that you said before, I'm apologize to get off subject, that you are, quote, a Democrat or whatever, which is fine by me, doesn't matter, but do you ever think about applying your beliefs on consequentialism or universals about opposing your will and doing a debate on politics?
I've done a debate on abortion. I've had discussions and debates informally on all sorts of issues where people are making moral proclamations, and we talk about the evaluation of them.
Yeah, well, the reason why I ask is because, and I'm sorry, I don't mean to paint you in the corner, to use your term, but
I bet I'm psychic and predict what you're going to say, but go ahead.
Yeah, I think you can too. Because wouldn't you also say that, for example, believing in a government system in itself would be immoral because the government itself poses will upon another person?
Can I just interject here?
Please.
When you were using the example of somebody using force, in my mind I was thinking, no, I can think of lots of situations where I think it would be absolutely not just a good idea to use force against someone to get what you want, but where I would think it would be obligatory. Where it would be like a moral obligation to do that. So, for example, I know a situation that happened here in Austin where a woman was trying to stab her landlord to death and the police officer shot her dead. She refused to drop the knife and she was killed.
Well,
and in my opinion, that's fine to use force to get what you want in that situation.
Well, see, that's where I think that, but though that would be neglecting Matt's point that he used earlier, your rights end at swinging your fist at the person's end of their nose. So obviously that person was violating that universal principle.
Right, and in that situation, I'm okay with someone using force to get what they want.
Yeah.
Well, I'm saying of coercive force versus defensive force.
Right, and so when the government applies force to get what they want, a lot of times that is obligatory. In fact, that police officer was the government applying force in order to get what they want.
Yeah, quite often the arguments on this tend to portray the government as if it's something else. We are the government.
Yeah.
All of us.
Well, see, I would have a problem with saying the point of we are the government, because I think like you said, your rights end at the other person's nose or whatever, and I don't think you say that it's not right for someone to own another person.
Are you a citizen of the United States?
Yes, I am.
Are you being forced to stay a citizen of the United States?
No, but you also
Hang on.
agree.
Okay. I'm not done. Are you eligible to run for office and be an elected official in the United States?
Yes, I am.
Are you allowed to vote and participate and influence the policies?
Yes, I am.
Then what's the complaint?
The complaint that I would say is, regardless, let's say that if 49% of the population does not want something and 51 does want something, the 51%
That's what we have a
the right
that's
to
what
enforce their...
That's why
you are arguing that the government is a matter of a simple democracy,
And
a
it's not.
simple majority, and that's not the government we have by any stretch of the imagination. We have a constitution, which is what protects the minority from the whims of the majority. If 75% of the people in the United States all of a sudden decided that they wanted to vote slavery back to being legal, that doesn't mean that that's what's going to happen. That's where the Constitution steps in.
I understand I understand what you're saying, but I also believe, like how we used earlier, you don't have the right to enforce your will on another person. Now, just let me finish with my point. I'll let you finish. My point would be is that basically if you don't have your right to enforce your will onto another person, and we have two political parties who both believe on, say, I don't know, taxation, and no matter who's ever's going to win, someone's going to show up to my door if I don't pay my taxes.
Correct.
And say, hold on, let me finish, and then let's say you need to give, you owe this amount of money, and eventually if I don't pay it, they will use force to take it from me.
Correct.
And my point is, I believe that to be immoral, especially when my
You
money
are
goes
here
to the
voluntarily.
war and the drug wars and the war in Iraq and the war in Afghanistan, which I don't support. So you're taking my money to support something that I find immorally wrong.
Tough.
You don't get to run the country individually. This is a society, and there is a social contract that you are a part of, not the king of. And we all have to participate.
I don't believe me signing into a social contract just because I was birthed into a certain plot of land.
As long
that makes me part of a social contract.
As long as you
can
are not
move.
coerced to stay here, you are voluntarily, every day you stay here, participating in the social contract at your free will.
I thought, but please tell me, which country does not have a form of government?
I don't know, whichever one you want to form.
I guess my point is like
Do you not think we're better? Do you not think that we're better off in the United States,
Where you have a right to participate?
where you have roads, where you have sewers, where you have education, where you have the internet, where you have the cell phone that you're calling me on?
May I finish?
No, actually, I was still talking when you interrupted.
Okay, go ahead.
Do you not think we're better off with those things that were paid for with taxes?
Yes, we do.
Now, what if 49% of the people decided that they didn't want their taxes to go to roads? Should we still have done it?
Absolutely not. Not when it comes to showing up to the door and, like I said, ultimately putting a gun to their head. My thing is, the ends do not justify the means.
Nobody's putting a gun to your head.
I just don't think you understand how social contracts work. I don't think you get it.
Okay, well, let me say this. If I write a, but my point is, if I decide I want to opt out, I find it very immoral to support the war on drugs. And I write to the letter to the government. I do not want to support this. They will use force and take my tax money from me. And that is my property rights. Those are the fruits of my labor.
How did you get that property? Who granted you that property? Who granted you the right to property?
Basically, that would be a contract between me and another individual that we both voluntarily agreed to.
Money isn't owned by people.
Okay, well, whatever you want to say. Let's say he pays me well. Unfortunately, force imposes.
Who enforces the contracts? Who enforces the contracts? When something doesn't go right and something goes wrong with your contract, where do you turn to get that enforced? When the other person says, I will not oblige the contract, where do you go for satisfaction?
Well, unfortunately, because the government has a monopoly on it, that would be
The
the criminal justice system.
How else would you do it? What are you going to do?
Because they have a monopoly. What do you mean? What's the alternative?
There is no alternative.
There you go. Thank you. So there's no alternative, so you shouldn't have to be doing this. Unfortunately, the government has a monopoly on it if you've just acknowledged that there's no alternative.
Because the government itself, you're asking me why am I dependent upon the government when the government makes me dependent upon it by force?
No, that's not what we asked. What we asked was, where do you go to get satisfaction when your contract has been violated? And then the question was, why do you go there? And you say, because there's no other option.
That's correct.
Okay, and we asked then, what other options could there be?
Could there be? Actually, that would be a very good thing. If there was no government, you could come up with a voluntary system done by society. Which
you would go to your neighbor with a gun and enforce it yourself.
And mediators
It would be
voluntary
crazy.
mediatorship.
You're describing a government.
You're describing a government, only instead of a government that we've all, participated in and elected, now we've got a bunch of little miniature mediators that the two of us have agreed to. So let's say you and I have a disagreement, and we then agree to allow Tracie to be the mediator between the two of us.
Yeah,
So
I get to be the authority, right?
Yeah,
Absolutely.
And
I'm the government.
And the two of us have agreed on that. Now, once we've decided that we've agreed on this, and Tracie makes her ruling, and she rules in your favor, and I decide that I'm no longer going to accept Tracie's authority, what do you do then?
Well, honestly, since we see the breach of contract, we would have either a private security or basically a private organization that would basically would do justice.
You're just building a government and you're calling it private. You're basically saying there's not a difference.
The difference is I find I don't have a right to not be part of the government or not support
Yes, you do.
government.
You can
or
leave.
different aspects.
You can leave. You can leave, or you can change it from the inside. You have multiple
Right.
options. The thing is, when we've agreed on this mediator, and then after I don't like her decision, I decide that I'm no longer going to agree on this mediator, now we're back at square one, because there's nothing you can do about it, because the fact is that the ability to enforce these things is something that has to be accepted
Right,
or imposed.
right.
And so in the absence of a good way to get everyone to accept, we've opted for a sort of compromise in that by virtue of being a citizen of the United States and living here and working here and participating in the system and reaping the benefits, you agree to allow the government to be that force. And when you don't, then the government will impose, because the rest of us in society would rather have a government that imposes the thing that you supposedly agreed to than to be stuck with no possible recompense.
But see, that's the thing. Because you have been born into a government, you don't see another alternative. And my point is, I think that you're comparing the contract that you and me have, and Tracie being the whatever mediator. That was a voluntary system. I always find that to be far better, something done voluntarily.
So
than
is your
being born
government.
into a country that I have been basically born into a slavery of debt already on my hands.
Slavery of debt. Goodbye. Goodbye. You don't get to go down the slavery road as if the government has made you a slave. Oh, massa, thank you for the roads, and I'm so happy to give you all my money. That is the most ridiculous crap ever. I'm a slave. I was born here. Can you leave? Yes. You're not a slave.
We are social creatures. We live in societies. It requires compromise, and it requires agreement and some source of authority to impose that.
Do you have the opportunity? Hey, how many slaves had the opportunity to
Leave.
Oh, I don't know, leave? How many of them had the opportunity to, let's say, vote on what kind of rules they were going to be
Or
following?
to run for office and become the master if they wanted to.
Let me be the master for a week. Huh?
Yeah, that's a weird form of slavery.
4 years. Yeah, this is the asinine, hyper-libertarian crap that I want nothing to do with. It's beyond ridiculous. I am all in favor of freedom, and I am all in favor of finding actual problems with any government and working to correct them.
Sure.
What these individuals will do is try to play the game that if you don't agree with their nearly anarchy-ridden solution, that you are just a puppet of the man and you buy into everything. No, I don't buy into everything, which is why I speak out against church-state violation issues. It's why I vote. It's why I encourage people to run for office. It's why I speak out on behalf of issues. And it's why when the Supreme Court comes down with a decision that I disagree with, I talk about it, because the next key is to educate other people so that we can change the courts in the future. Sometimes there has to be a little bit of short-term pain in order to make a long-term gain. And that's the only way that you can actually go about enforcing things, is by that force in the word enforcing. Otherwise, what you have is, I don't agree with you. Well, now what? Tracie, I'm going to let you arbitrate this as long as you agree with me.
Yeah. At some point, when I make the arbitration ruling, one of the people is not going to like what I'm saying because they're already not agreeing on how it should come down. Yeah. So the moment I lay down any sort of, okay, this is what I've decided, one of them is going to be like, I don't like this. But they're going to abide by it, right? Because otherwise, what is the point? How would it even work if you couldn't get people to abide by contracts by some source of authority? And what a pissant concern to worry about where the authority comes from. And the point is, when the two people come together and they say, we're going to appoint this authority, what you've just done is exactly what happens with a government.
How do you think we got here to where it's kind of unfair to keep talking, but now that I've hung up on him. But how do you think we got here? We started with little bitty tribes where you had somebody in charge, and this grew naturally into governments because we recognized, hey, we need some way to solve these problems. That does not mean that all governments are equal. It does not mean that the government is, and as I pointed out at the very beginning, the government isn't some entity separate from us.
Right.
This is a participatory system. It's about as good as you could want. And I'm not, like go USA or anything like that. I'm talking about the ability to participate in the process and change the process, and the freedom to leave if you don't like the way the process is going.
I have a friend that works with groups in Guatemala, like indigenous populations, and there are some groups that actually have a communistic system where everybody has to agree. Like they will sit there and hammer out an issue, and sometimes they'll meet for weeks, like just to come up with an agreement so that they can then proceed with something. But how do you do that in a population of millions? Right? You can't do that. That's why we have representation. It's required. Otherwise, you would get nothing done. And people who are organized and do have governments will come and take your shit.
And see, that's why, when you talk about like marriage equality, for example, the opinion of the majority is rapidly becoming irrelevant, and it's also not becoming the majority. Things are changing. We live in a dynamic universe. This is the way things happen. Now, I might actually agree that the government might not be in a position to have any say over marriage, but that's an absurd position right now because we're stuck with it.